Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to break down the complex, often contradictory information that shapes our world so you don't have to.
And today we're taking on a really high-stakes mission.
We really are. We're analyzing the argument that our entire global economy, and by extension your financial future, is built on a series of, well, lies.
Our sources, which are rooted in a deep analysis of wealth and power, all point to this one central idea, that the world runs on fake money.
And that this fake money is what's making the poor and middle class poorer year after year.
Exactly. It's an investigation into what they call a systemic deception. The sources argue this isn't just a typical market downturn we're facing. It's a symptom of a much, much deeper failure.
A structural failure.
A structural failure, yeah. And it comes down to three things, three interconnected pillars we have to define right up front. Fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets.
Okay, so if you can get your head around those three concepts, you basically have the roadmap for what's coming next.
That's the argument. The sources frame this whole broken system as a giant, confusing puzzle that took decades to put together.
Right. The author talks about spending 35 years compiling this, like 1,000-piece financial puzzle. And the final piece that made the whole picture just snap into focus was published not too long ago in 2018.
And that piece was a Time magazine article, May 28, 2018, by a writer named Stephen Brill. The title was How My Generation Broke America.
Wow.
And what's so critical here is that Brill is one of these academic elites. The sources talk about a Yale Law School graduate, and he was essentially confirming predictions made decades earlier by thinkers like Bucky Fuller.
So you have an insider, an academic elite, admitting that his own generation, the people educated at the most exclusive schools, built an economy on deals that moved assets around instead of building new ones.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
'Cause that really gets to the heart of the fake assets problem.
It's basically a confession. That's how the sources see it. The elites decided that financial engineering was more profitable than, actually creating businesses or products.
So they created these complex, exotic, and frankly dangerous financial instruments.
The so-called fake assets, yeah. Things like derivatives, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, all designed to generate massive profits for the people who created them, while completely insulating those same people from the risk.
And we saw how that played out in 2008.
Yeah.
When these things blew up, the creators weren't punished.
You were rewarded, they got bonuses. And the average taxpayer, you were left to foot the bill through higher taxes and this quiet, corrosive inflation.
Which brings us to the scale of the danger today.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a small problem.
No, it's almost incomprehensibly massive. The high-end estimate for the global derivatives market is $1.2 quadrillion.
Quadrillion, it's a number that doesn't even feel real. How do you put that into perspective?
Quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. So the entire economic output of the whole planet, the global GDP, is around $100 trillion.
So this house of cards, this fake liability, is roughly 12 times larger than everything the world produces in a year.
That's it. That is the magnitude of the disaster waiting to happen. And that's why we're doing this. The mission of this deep dive is to give you, the person who is not an academic elite, the tools to hopefully survive and maybe even thrive when this reckoning comes.
And it all comes back to that one core definition. Fake money makes the rich richer. Unfortunately, fake money also makes the poor and middle class poorer. So let's start at the beginning, the moment money became fake.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the story really begins on a specific date, August 15th, 1971, the Nixon shock. This is, according to our sources, ground zero for the whole crisis.
It really is. That's the day President Nixon went on television and unilaterally, without consulting anyone really, took the U.S. dollar off the international gold standard.
Before that day, you could, in theory, exchange your dollars for a fixed amount of physical gold.
Right. The dollar was backed by a hard asset. After that day, it became pure fiat money, which is just a fancy way of saying its value is based entirely on a government decree, on faith.
And the sources are so clear about this. They say it was one of the biggest changes in financial history, but almost nobody at the time understood what it really meant long term.
And the official reason Nixon gave was, well, it was basically a smokescreen. He claimed he had to close the gold window because foreign countries, Germany, France, and so on, were losing trust in the dollar.
Because of America's trade deficit, right. We were importing way more than we were exporting Japanese cars, French wine.
Exactly. And those foreign governments were starting to say, you know what? We don't want your paper dollars anymore. We want the gold you promised. And that was draining America's gold reserves at an alarming rate.
So Nixon's solution was just to stop paying. He promised he'd go back to the gold standard once the trade balance was fixed, but
But he never did. And that broken promise is what the sources call a key historical betrayal. The real consequence was that the dollar stopped being a representation of wealth and instead became fundamentally debt.
So from that day forward, the American taxpayer started paying for everything with IOUs. The government could just print money to cover its bills.
And export its inflation to the rest of the world. And what's fascinating is that even highly educated people were completely blind to what was happening. There's this great anecdote from 1972, right after the shock.
This is the author in Vietnam.
Yeah, he was a Marine pilot in Vietnam. And this story just perfectly illustrates that gap between, academic smarts and real-world financial intelligence. It brings in that fake teachers idea.
So he and another pilot, both highly educated officers, they get intrigued by the price of gold, which is suddenly shooting up now that it's unpegged from the dollar.
And they decide they're going to buy some on the black market. They fly 25 miles behind enemy lines, risking their lives to do this.
That's incredible. So they're driven by this curiosity about real money.
But they get there and they realize they are completely, utterly ignorant. They meet this tiny, unassuming Vietnamese gold dealer in a little bamboo shack. And they try to negotiate based on the spot price of gold they saw in a newspaper, thinking they're, the smart ones in the room.
But the dealer, she knew better.
Oh, she knew much better. They ask to see gold nuggets, and she shows them these little pieces of painted, dried fruit. The book calls them dried raisins, and they can't tell the difference. They realize in that moment that for all their education, they're financial idiots.
While this dealer, who deals in tangible metal every day, understands money on a level they can't even comprehend.
Exactly. And that whole experience led to a much bigger question that gets at the government's motives. Why was it illegal for Americans to own gold in the first place?
Right, because it was.
They discovered that President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, had outlawed the private ownership of gold way back in 1933.
So this wasn't new.
Not at all. And the official reason was to fight the Great Depression. But the real reason, according to our sources, was about one thing: control. The government and the Federal Reserve wanted total control over the money supply. By forcing people out of gold, they trapped everyone inside a banking system that they alone could manipulate.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the three types of money that exist today.
Precisely. You've got 1, God's money, gold and silver, elemental, eternal.
2, government's money, dollars, euros, pesos, fiat currencies, the fake money.
And then the new one, category 3, people's money, Bitcoin, Ethereum, cryptocurrencies. The argument we're exploring is that to survive, you have to get your wealth out of category 2 and into real assets.
Okay, so that brings us to the whole philosophy of trust. If the government's money is just debt and the system is designed to inflate, why on earth should anyone trust a dollar just because it has "In God We Trust" stamped on it?
The irony is it's profound, isn't it? The sources argue that gold, which is atomic element 79, and silver, element 47, are the only things that truly deserve that label of God's money.
Because they're just elements. They're part of the periodic table.
Exactly. They were here when the earth formed. They'll be here long after the last government, the last bank, even the last cockroach is gone. They don't require anyone's promise. Their value is inherent.
And when you contrast that with the history of government money, it's just one long story of debasement and collapse. This isn't a new thing.
No, it's an ancient pattern. And it's a lesson that financial elites seem to ignore over and over again. Look at the Chinese. They were the first to print paper money around 600 AD.
And what happened?
Their empire eventually collapsed. Why? Because the elites needed money for wars and big monuments, so they just printed more and more fake money until it was completely worthless.
Same story with the Romans, right? Though they were a bit more subtle about it.
A bit more sneaky, yeah. Their original coins were pure silver and gold. But as the empire's debts grew, they started creating fake money. They did it in 2 ways. First, they literally trimmed the edges of the coins, a process called clipping, and melted the shavings to make new coins.
So they were shrinking the money supply, literally.
And second, they started debasing the coins by mixing in cheaper metals like copper and tin. So an honest silver coin eventually became just a copper slug with a thin silver coating. And of course, people immediately figured it out. They held on to the real silver coins and spent the fake ones as fast as they could.
Which is a perfect example of Gresham's law.
It is. The law just formalizes that behavior. When bad or fake money enters the system, the good, real money goes into hiding.
And the sources use a more modern example from 1965 in the U.S.
Right. In 1965, the U.S. government started taking the silver out of its dimes, quarters, and half dollars. People knew that the pre-1965 coins were 90% real silver, while the new ones were just worthless copper and nickel.
So what did they do?
They hoarded the old ones, they went to the bank, exchanged their paper dollars for rolls of silver coins, and kept the real, good money. It's the only logical response when you can no longer trust the issuer of the currency.
And when you look at the charts the sources provide, the visual evidence of this decay since 1971, it's just jaw-dropping.
It's the smoking gun. You chart the stability of gold's purchasing power from 1900 to 2018, and it's a relatively flat line. Then you overlay the major world currencies, the dollar, the yen, the euro, and they all just plummet towards zero.
Especially the U.S. dollar since the creation of the Fed in 1913. It's basically a vertical drop.
It confirms the entire thesis. If you save in government money, you are, by design, guaranteed to lose.
And this isn't just some abstract historical pattern. The sources draw a really direct and frankly terrifying parallel between what the U.S. is doing now and what Weimar Germany did in the 1920s.
And we have to be clear about how serious that comparison is. After the 2008 crash, you can look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. It's public data, and it just explodes. The U.S. printed trillions of dollars out of thin air through quantitative easing.
And that's exactly what the German government did with their currency, the Reichsmark, to pay off war debts.
It's the same mechanism, printing unbacked fiat currency to pay off debts. And history has zero examples of that ending well. Every single fiat currency in history has eventually returned to its intrinsic value.
Which is zero.
Which is zero. And the sheer volume of printing that happened after 2008 and then again in 2020 suggests America's on that same path. The question isn't if it collapses, but when and how fast.
So if government money is doomed to fail, the whole strategy has to change. It's not about accumulating more money, it's about accumulating protection. And this next part lays out 7 practical reasons for owning physical gold and silver, framing it as insurance.
Yes, and this is probably the most important distinction we can make for you. It's a complete mindset shift.
So, reason 1, they are not investments. This is critical. You don't buy gold and silver hoping for a big ROI, a return on investment.
No, you are buying an insurance policy. It's a hedge against frankly, the stupidity and the arrogance of the elites who think they can manage a global economy by just hitting print on a computer.
It's a vote of no confidence.
It's a vote of no confidence in the people running the system. The sources say the elites never admit they're wrong. They make a colossal mistake, they get a bonus. And you, the middle class, you pay the price through taxes and inflation. Gold is your insurance policy against that. You hold it forever like you'd hold flood insurance on a house in a floodplain.
Okay, that leads right into reason 2. No risk. Now, that sounds totally counterintuitive. We see the price of gold go up and down every day. How can that be no risk?
The definition of risk gets flipped on its head. When the sources say there's no risk in gold, they mean the asset itself, the physical metal, is fundamentally sound. The price fluctuations you see gold at $1,500 one day, $2,000 the next, that's not the gold changing. That's the value of the fake money, the dollar that you're using to measure it. That's what's unstable.
So the real risk is holding the dollars.
The real risk is having your savings in a bank account that's being systematically devalued by money printing. That's the guaranteed loss. The gold itself is the constant.
And this whole idea forces us to look at the central weakness of the entire system, which is counterparty risk.
This is the linchpin. This holds the entire fake system together. Counterparty risk is simply the risk that the other side of a deal won't make good on their promise. If I lend you $100, my counterparty risk is that you won't pay me back.
And the terrifying thing is that our entire global monetary system is built on this.
Every single piece of it. Your bank account, your mortgage, a corporate bond, all of it. Every paper asset is just a promise from someone else. And the system only works as long as everybody keeps their promises.
Whereas physical gold
has no counterparty risk. It's not a promise from a bank or a government. It's a promise from God, from the universe. If the entire banking system implodes tomorrow, the gold coin in your hand is still a gold coin.
We have to break down how this counterparty risk is exactly what caused the 2008 crash. This is the definition of fake assets.
This is so essential. It all started with subprime mortgages, risky loans to people who probably couldn't pay them back. The banks didn't want that risk, so they sold the loans.
They packaged them up.
They packaged them into these incredibly complex things called mortgage-backed securities, or MBSs. This is your first-level fake asset. It's a derivative whose value is derived from a pool of debt.
They had to make it look safe.
Right. So they layered on another level of complexity. Insurance policies called credit default swaps, or CDSs. And this created a chain of counterparty dependency that was trillions and trillions of dollars deep. Warren Buffett wasn't kidding when he called derivatives financial weapons of mass destruction.
Because when the first domino fell, when the subprime borrowers couldn't pay, the whole chain just exploded.
The whole thing blew up, and governments had to step in and bail out the very people who created the weapons. And as we've said, the poor and middle class paid for it. The fake assets did exactly what they were designed to do, enrich the creators at everyone else's expense.
Okay, moving on to reason 3. Gold and silver attract real wealth. This is where it gets a little more philosophical.
It does. There's an anecdote about a Hindu guru who explains that holding, say, $1,000 of real gold outside the system attracts $1 million in real wealth. Now, that's not a financial guarantee. It's more of a spiritual lesson.
It's about prudence and wisdom being rewarded.
Exactly. It's about choosing something permanent over a paper promise, and that wisdom attracts opportunity.
And that idea of holding it outside the system is key for reason 4.
Yeah.
Why not paper gold like ETFs or gold stocks?
Because they're fakes. They're derivatives. They still rely on counterparty trust and, crucially, on the fractional reserve banking system. We need to explain that with the goldsmith analogy.
All right, let's walk through it.
Imagine the very first banker is a goldsmith. People give him 10 real gold coins to keep safe. He gives them 10 paper certificates in return. Simple.
1-to-1 backing.
At first. But the goldsmith realizes people rarely come to get all their gold at once. So he gets an idea. He keeps 1 coin in the vault, a 10% reserve, and he lends out the other 9 coins.
So now there are 10 paper certificates floating around, but only 1 coin in the vault to back them up.
And it gets worse, because those 9 lent-out coins get spent and deposited in another bank, which does the same thing. It's how the system creates money from nothing. And that's why paper gold, like an ETF, is so dangerous. The sources estimate that for every 1 real gold coin sitting in an ETF vault, there could be 50, maybe even 100 paper claims on that single coin.
So if everyone asks for their physical gold at the same time,
The system collapses. You're left holding worthless paper.
this brings us to reason 5. The system is broken and the gap is growing. The sources connect all this financial trickery directly to the decay of society. The decision in 1971 to go off gold poured gasoline on the fire of income inequality.
The numbers are just horrifying. The top 1% share of total wealth in America more than doubled between 1970 and 2007, from 9% to 24%. The system was explicitly redesigned to vacuum wealth upwards from the working class to the financial class through inflation and asset bubbles.
And the fallout is a society with record household debt and, according to the sources, the highest poverty rate among 35 developed nations. But the most immediate danger for millions of people is the collapse of pensions.
Yes, defined benefit plans are going broke. CalPERS, the giant California pension fund, is reportedly $1 trillion underfunded. Social Security, Medicare, they all face massive shortfalls.
And when those fail, the taxpayer will be on the hook.
Absolutely. The middle class will pay either through huge tax hikes, drastic benefit cuts, or just runaway inflation. It proves the point. The elites build financial moats to protect their wealth while everyone else is left to drown in the systemic risk.
And to round out the practical case, we have reason 6, God's money versus government money, and reason 7, God's money is easy to acquire.
Reason 6 is just a summary of the power dynamic. The charts don't lie. Fiat currencies go to zero. The elites know this, which is why they secretly warehouse real gold while publicly telling you to trust the paper money they can print an infinite amount of.
As long as you keep working for it.
As long as you keep working for it. And reason 7 is the call to action. You don't need a PhD to do this. Buying real gold and silver coins is simple and low risk. Anyone can afford pre-1965 U.S. silver coins. A silver dime, a silver quarter, that's your entry point. That's your first step toward getting some real insurance.
So this next part really drives home the historical inevitability of this whole thing. And the core idea is pretty chilling. People who work for money work for people who print money.
That phrase just perfectly captures the trap of a fiat currency system, doesn't it? If your paycheck is in dollars, you're working for an instrument that your boss's boss, the government, can devalue anytime they want.
And history shows that printing fake money never, ever ends well.
Never. The sources call them cash heists. We've talked about Rome and China, but you see it right here in American history. The continental dollar during the Revolutionary War, hyperinflated to worthlessness.
And the Confederate dollar during the Civil War.
same story. Printed into oblivion to finance a war, and it became totally worthless. But the most important modern example, the one we have to keep coming back to, is Weimar Germany.
The images from that time are just haunting.
They are. The Weimar government printed money to pay impossible war debts. The result wasn't just inflation, it was hyperinflation. Prices were doubling in a matter of hours.
People needed a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread.
Exactly. Workers would get paid twice a day, and their families would wait at the factory gates to rush out and spend the money before it lost even more value. You see pictures of children playing with stacks of worthless banknotes like they were building blocks.
Because they were literally cheaper than toys?
Cheaper than wallpaper. That chaos completely wiped out the middle class and paved the way for political extremism. And you see the same pattern today in places like Zimbabwe or Venezuela. It all starts with the government printing money it doesn't have. And the sources argue that 1971 was the start of the gross universal cash heist, the biggest money printing operation in human history, all made invisible because there was no gold to hold it accountable.
And this invisible heist directly impacts the retirement crisis facing millions of baby boomers today.
It's a direct connection. Before 1971, most workers had defined benefit pensions, a DB plan. It was a promise from your employer. Work for us for 30 years and we'll give you a fixed paycheck for the rest of your life. It was security.
But those became too expensive for corporations.
Right. So after 1974, they shifted the risk. They replaced those secure DB plans with defined contribution plans, like the 401k.
Which basically forced every American worker to become a stock market investor overnight.
An investor with zero financial education. That's the fake teachers part of the crisis. Millions of people were forced to gamble their retirement savings in a stock market they didn't understand, chasing returns because the interest on a safe bank account was basically zero.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It is. The sources say something like 40% of older households don't have enough to maintain their standard of living in retirement. That's about 15 million households on the brink. And while this was happening to the middle class, the elites were busy building their nation of moats.
Exporting jobs, creating risky fake assets, and using their political connections to make sure they were protected when it all came crashing down.
Exactly. The system wasn't just flawed, it was, according to these sources, intentionally designed to benefit them by destroying the economic foundation for everyone else. They're not just portrayed as incompetent managers, they're portrayed as despots who use their power to operate above the law.
So this next section brings it all down to a personal level and asks the listener, you, how much money are you printing? And it starts with the idea of collateral.
Right, the old Texas saying, all hat, no cattle. A lot of people look rich, big house, fancy car, but it's all built on debt. They have no real collateral.
And we learned in 2008 that the elites were no different. Their collateral was fake too. Those MBSs backed by mortgages that were designed to fail.
The whole system was built on a belief in fake collateral, but the really mind-bending idea here is how you, the listener, are actively participating in printing money every single day. The sources say, when you save money in a bank, you are printing money.
Okay, that's going to challenge a lot of people's thinking. How does putting my money in a savings account mean I'm printing money?
It's because of that fractional reserve system we talked about. You deposit $1,000, the bank only has to keep a tiny fraction of that, maybe $100. They immediately lend out the other $900.
And that $900 becomes a new deposit somewhere else.
And that bank lends out 90% of it, and so on. Your initial deposit allows the banking system to create maybe 10 times that amount in new loans, in new fake money. The bank pays you, what, 2% interest on your $1,000, while they're earning 18% on the money they created because of you?
So you are literally financing their money printing machine.
You are. And the flip side is your credit card. When you use your credit card, you are printing money for the bank, and you're the one paying the high interest. The whole system is designed to reward the bank's printing, not your saving.
And this exponential creation of money is what the book calls the Mandrake mechanism.
Named after Mandrake the magician, who could pull things out of a hat. That's what fractional reserve banking is. It's a magic show that pulls wealth out of thin air. That original 10 gold coins, through this mechanism, can expand to support quadrillions in fake paper assets in the derivative market.
And the magic show works just fine, as long as nobody has to see what's really in the hat.
Correct. But in 2008, the show almost stopped. The subprime crisis threatened to pull back the curtain. And that's when Mandrake, in the form of the Fed and the Treasury, had to pull over $1 quadrillion out of his hat to keep the illusion going.
Which brings up the fear of a bank run. If the magic stops, and everyone wants their actual money back at the same time, the system freezes. The FDIC insures deposits up to $250,000. But do they actually have enough money to cover a systemic collapse?
The sources are highly skeptical. The FDIC has reserves, but they are a drop in the ocean compared to the trillions in the banking system. If the whole Mandrake tent collapses, that insurance isn't going to be enough.
And this whole mechanism, this whole magic show, it needs one thing to survive: constant inflation.
It's the lifeblood. The system has created quadrillions of dollars of debt. Without inflation, that debt becomes crushing. It leads to deflation, where prices fall and debt gets more expensive. And that causes a depression.
So after 2008, the government had to create inflation.
They had to. That's what quantitative easing, QE, was all about. They pumped trillions of new fake money into the system to force inflation, to devalue the debt. It's how they transferred the cost of the bank failure to you through higher prices and a weaker dollar.
And the people who got hurt the most by this were the savers.
Absolutely. The biggest losers. Imagine you're a retiree, a millionaire living on the interest from your savings. Before 2008, you might have been earning 15% interest. That's $150,000 a year. After 2008, interest rates went to zero. Your income evaporated overnight. These people became the new poor, forced into the risky stock market just to survive.
And this whole path of printing fake money just keeps pointing back to that one terrifying outcome: hyperinflation. Just like Weimar Germany.
The lesson from Weimar is how fast it can happen. Once public confidence breaks, it's over. And the sources argue that America is on the same trajectory. The massive debt, the reliance on printing, the growing inequality, there are all the classic warning signs. If that counterparty trust snaps, the paper money goes to zero.
So this final part moves beyond the mechanics and into the philosophy. It lays out 8 philosophical reasons for owning gold and silver, and it all comes down to trust.
Yes. This is the synthesis of everything we've talked about. It's about who and what you ultimately decide to trust.
Reason 1, trust. It's as simple as that. Do you trust God's money, the elemental permanent nature of gold, or do you trust the fake money created by elites who consistently get it wrong?
And reason 2, which we have to repeat, gold and silver are not investments. They are insurance against the arrogance of those same elites. Brill's article called them despots, rulers who operate above the law and use their power to control the system for their own benefit. Owning gold is how you opt out of their control.
The sources also talk about the danger of fake truth, of just accepting the official story, or what they call his story, written by the winners.
That's the fake teacher's idea bleeding into everything. The lesson is that you have to question authority, even educated authority. The PhDs and the CEOs, they all got it wrong in 2008. Real financial education means learning from mistakes and thinking for yourself.
And why is this so critical for the average person right now?
Because for most people, money isn't about getting rich anymore. It's about survival. Food, shelter, your kids' education. The constant stress about money, the sources say, squeezes the life out of their minds, bodies, and souls. People are trapped. Gold and silver represent a potential escape from that trap.
The strategy, then, is to own real gold and silver and keep it outside the banking system.
That's the core of the defense, because when the governments, the banks, and the elites inevitably fail, that foundation will still be there. Real assets are hard for them to control or manipulate.
And for the person who really understands this system, there's a final, more advanced step.
Right. If you have a real financial education, a crisis is an opportunity. The key is to use the system against itself. Use debt, the government's fake money, to acquire real assets, like gold and silver. That's how you not only survive the reset, but potentially thrive. But it requires a level of knowledge that our fake teachers will never give you.
So we have taken a massive deep dive today. We've gone through the birth of fake money in 1971, the sheer scale of fake assets like the $1.2 quadrillion derivatives market, and the practical and philosophical reasons for owning real gold and silver as insurance.
And the point of all this knowledge is preparation, not panic. You have to remember the Chinese symbol for crisis. It's made of 2 characters. One means danger, the other means opportunity. A financial crisis is the greatest transfer of wealth in history, and it's an opportunity for those who are prepared.
We've shown how this entire system is built on the magic trick of fractional reserve banking and a global web of promises. We've analyzed why the "in God we trust" on the dollar is a fundamental contradiction. So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought.
If the entire global financial structure, from your mortgage to your pension to the quadrillion-dollar derivatives market, relies entirely on counterparty trust to function, How long can that system possibly survive once the average person realizes that the financial elites in charge are the very same people who are profiting from and protected against its eventual collapse?
Your next step is to decide how you're going to protect yourself and your family from a system that is designed to take your wealth. Thank you for diving deep with us.
See you on the next Deep Dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just looking at economic trends, I think. We're performing something more like an emergency inspection of the very foundations of the global financial system.
That's a good way to put it. We are diving into a really provocative analysis of what some are calling the gross universal cash heist.
It's a shocking term, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at the numbers, it starts to feel, well, a little less hyperbolic.
The numbers definitely back up the scale of the potential calamity. We are confronting a systemic financial weakness centered in the derivatives market, which, by some high-end estimates, sits at an almost incomprehensible number.
$1.2 quadrillion.
Exactly. 1.2 quadrillion.
That number, 1,000 times 1 trillion, that's where the risk is hiding. In plain sight.
It is. And our mission today is to understand how this risk developed.
Because our sources provide this. This very specific ideological framework. They claim the global economy has been intentionally rigged since 1971 by what they call the three central fakes.
Fake money, fake assets, and fake teachers. The teachers being the elites who engineered the system.
We're going to be extracting the core insights on how these three elements, especially the shift in how we define assets and liabilities, are, relentlessly widening that wealth gap.
Making the rich richer and leaving the poor and middle class struggling to survive, especially in retirement.
We've seen the evidence for the big crashes, right? 1929, the 2000 tech bubble, 2008. The core argument here is that these weren't accidents.
No, not at all. They were systemic consequences of a flawed post-1971 monetary system.
So we start with the central challenge that our sources present to you, the listener. In a world where verifying what is real and what is fake is the ultimate difference between wealth and poverty, where do you stand? Let's unpack this by first defining these fakes. The journey has to begin with the money itself, with fake money. Most people use the dollar every day and just assume it's this stable, unchanging unit of value.
But that stability is, well, it's historically an illusion, especially since the early 1970s.
Yeah.
That's the exact starting point of this analysis. August 15th, 1971. That was the date President Richard Nixon went on television and unilaterally suspended the convertibility of the U.S. dollar into gold.
He effectively ended the Bretton Woods system.
It did, and overnight, the dollar was officially converted into fiat money currency, declared legal tender by government decree, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of that government.
And the consequence of that single act, according to the source material, is simple but just devastating. Fake money makes the rich richer and the poor and middle class poorer. I know that sounds like a huge sensational statement, but how does the mechanism actually work? How does fake money actively transfer wealth?
It's all about who gets to use the new money first. When a government or a central bank prints new currency, and we're talking physically or more often now, digitally through quantitative easing, that new money enters the financial system through the big banks and institutions.
The ones closest to power.
The ones closest to power. So asset holders, the rich, get this new clean money first. They use it to buy assets like stocks, real estate, businesses, before that money circulates widely enough to cause generalized price inflation.
So their assets inflate in value first. Meanwhile, the purchasing power of, say, a middle-class worker salary, their paycheck, it's already diminished by the time the money actually gets to them.
Exactly right. The middle class works for W-2 wages, which are sticky, they're slow to adjust to inflation. The rich, on the other hand, they leverage debt, which is simply fake money created by this banking system.
So they can borrow, say, $10 million at a really low interest rate.
Buy appreciating assets, and then pay back that debt later with dollars that are worth less because of the inflation they helped create. They're essentially printing money legally through leverage and an asset collateralization. It's something the average W-2 earner just cannot do.
It puts that 1971 moment into a much larger historical context then. It shows that money printing is just. It's the latest version of a very, very old scam.
Oh, history is littered with these examples. We forget the precedent all the time. Look at the Romans. They funded their massive empire and their endless wars by debasing their silver denarius coins. They just kept adding more and more base metals, copper, until there was almost no silver left.
And the money became worthless.
It did. Or the Chinese printing paper money, way back, starting in 8618, leading to these huge cycles of boom and collapse. And of course, the most famous example is the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation in the 1920s.
The photos of people with wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread.
It's terrifying. And the sources point out something even more alarming. If you overlay the chart of post-Weimar money printing with the chart of the U.S. money supply expansion after 2008,
The patterns are similar.
they are disturbingly similar, which leads to the source's ultimate conclusion. Fiat currency, government money, has a 100% failure rate historically. Not one has ever survived the test of time.
Wow. Okay, so if the money itself is fake, let's move to the second element, fake assets. And this forces us to revisit a concept we think we all know. An asset puts money in your pocket, a liability takes money out. Simple.
Simple in theory, but applying that distinction rigorously, it fundamentally changes how we view some of our most common household items.
The most controversial claim, and this is one that really gets people, is that for millions of people, their own home, their primary residence, is actually a liability, not an asset.
It's a core tenet of the philosophy guiding this material, and it flies in the face of conventional wisdom.
I have to push back a bit here, because nearly every accountant, every financial advisor in America would disagree. They'd point to the tax deductions on mortgage interest, the inflation hedge that real estate provides. How does the source material argue against that?
The refutation is laser-focused on one thing: cash flow. A true asset puts money in your pocket month after month. It generates income. Your primary residence, unless you're renting out a room, only takes money out of your pocket. You have mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, landscaping. The list goes on.
So the argument is that the benefit of capital appreciation is only realized when you sell.
Right, and even then you have to immediately buy another house to live in, which just restarts the whole cycle of cash outflow. The true asset is the investment property that pays you monthly rent. The home you live in is a glorified utility, which, by that cash flow definition, is a liability.
That clarifies the distinction, but the really critical piece, the one that ties into this systemic crisis, is what the sources call the retirement trap.
This is huge. Millions of people are investing their life savings in vehicles they are told are assets, 401ks, IRAs, government pensions. The source views these as the ultimate fake asset.
Why? Because they're liabilities.
Yeah, because they are mechanisms designed specifically to extract money from the individual worker and transfer that capital immediately to Wall Street. The money is controlled by third-party fund managers. It often incurs substantial hidden fees, and it's invested in instruments the worker doesn't really understand.
The worker bears all the risk.
All the risk, but the financial industry reaps the immediate reward in fees and commissions.
So the average worker is basically forced to feed the beast Wall Street with mandatory deductions from their paycheck, all under the guise of saving for their own future.
Precisely. They are transferring their scarce real labor value into high-risk paper assets. And what we're seeing now is future retirees, especially baby boomers, realizing they do not have enough money to support themselves after they retire. They're left holding the bag.
Because the mechanism was designed to enrich the managers, not the savers.
That's the argument.
Which brings us right to the architects of this system. The elites, or what the source calls the fake teachers. Who are these people?
The sources point to the generation of academic achievers who graduated from elite universities. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, the boomer generation that came of age in the 70s and 80s. Stephen Brill's analysis in Time magazine really crystallized this phenomenon.
These were the brilliant people who moved into a professional world that was focused on, well, on financialization, not industrial production.
It was a fundamental shift from a production-based economy to a deal-making, asset repackaging economy. They focused on moving wealth, not creating new businesses or high-paying jobs.
And they created the very exotic, risky financial instruments that allowed them to profit immediately while pushing the consequences onto the public.
We are talking specifically about the massive expansion of the derivatives market and things like credit default swaps.
Let's talk about the scale shock because the numbers are just staggering. Warren Buffett called derivatives financial weapons of mass destruction 2 decades ago.
He did?
And he was reacting to a market that was a fraction of its current size. Now we're talking about that $1.2 quadrillion high-end estimate. What exactly makes up that risk today? Why has it ballooned so much since 2008?
Well, in 2008, the risk was mainly concentrated in mortgage-backed derivatives, those toxic assets tied to the housing market.
Right.
Today, that $1.2 quadrillion is overwhelmingly dominated by two main areas: interest rate swaps and currency swaps. And these aren't traded on public exchanges. They're privately negotiated between the world's largest banks, financial institutions, and multinational corporations.
So it's not just a housing problem anymore. It's this massive, tangled web of promises related to global currency movements and interest rate fluctuations, all happening in the dark.
Exactly. It's opaque. And the growth is a direct result of the post-2008 response: quantitative easing and near-zero interest rates. Central banks created extreme market volatility and distorted the price of money.
Forcing companies and banks to use derivatives to hedge or speculate on what rates will do next.
Correct. So the academic elites running these systems, they didn't just survive 2008, they leveraged the massive influx of cheap money and low regulation to expand the casino to this incredible size. They separated the profit takers from the consequence bearers with absolute precision.
If the underlying mechanisms are built on this fake foundation, the place where the system truly breaks for the individual is their retirement. We have to look closely at that seismic shift from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans.
This transition, which really took off after ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, was passed in 1974, it fundamentally changed the contract between an employer and an employee.
Before 1974, the defined benefit, or DB pension, was the standard, right? It was a guaranteed paycheck for life.
It was calculated based on your tenure and your salary. And the genius of that old system was its simplicity for the worker.
You didn't need to be a financial genius.
Exactly. Financial education was irrelevant because the company assumed all the investment risk and guaranteed your income stream. The company hired the experts, managed the funds, and they bore the liability.
But corporations realized pretty quickly what an enormous financial burden those guarantees were.
They did, and the 401k, the main example of a defined contribution plan, was actually born shortly after ERISA. It was originally intended as a small, tax-advantaged savings shelter for executives.
But the sources say that corporations basically weaponized this tax shelter. They turned it into the primary retirement vehicle for everyone.
They did. They shifted the entire financial risk onto the worker, turning millions of baby boomers into professional money managers overnight.
And they did it without providing any of the financial education needed to actually handle that responsibility.
And the result is the crisis we have now: a generation reaching retirement age in a demonstrably worse financial state. They were promised stability through these supposed assets, but they're finding that the average 401k balance is dangerously insufficient.
The statistics are just horrifying. The source material notes that 10,000 boomers are retiring every single day, and they're facing higher average debt than previous generations, largely due to health costs and the strain of being the sandwich generation.
Financially supporting both their aging parents and their adult children who are struggling with student debt or housing costs, it's an impossible squeeze.
And if we look at the data cited from 2016, the median 401k balance for people nearing retirement ages 55 to 64 was only $135,000.
$135,000. I mean, if you try to annuitize that, what do you get? A tiny, almost negligible monthly income. Maybe $600 a month for a couple.
That's a massive failure of the DC system. It disguised a huge liability as a benefit.
It did.
And this personal crisis scales up immediately into a systemic crisis.
Yeah.
The imminent pension collapse.
The promises made to public sector employees are just. They're unfunded. We see this with giant funds like CalPERS in California. They have massive unfunded liabilities.
And the analysis highlights that the single largest government employee pension fund is already $1 trillion underfunded.
$1 trillion. That gap isn't going to be filled by magic. It will be filled by taxpayers, which just puts even more financial strain on the middle class.
And the timeline for this disaster seems to be getting shorter, especially with government benefits like Social Security and Medicare.
The projections are grim. While the overall collapse might be further out, the financial disaster is expected to accelerate significantly around 2026.
Why 2026 specifically?
That's when the first wave of boomers reaches 80, and they'll begin requiring exponentially more long-term health care. Social Security and Medicare funds are already projected to face huge deficits, and that demographic wave will be the true test of their solvency.
This entire section really speaks to the core claim of the cash heist: the systematic increase in income inequality since 1971.
The data tracing that inequality it's irrefutable evidence of the shift. From 1929 to 1970, income inequality was actually decreasing.
Really? The middle-class income grew faster than the upper class.
It did.
Yeah.
The bottom 90% of the population saw their share of total wealth increase dramatically, reaching 68% by 1970. The system, for all its flaws, was distributing wealth more broadly.
But the moment the gold standard was abandoned and the shift to fiat money accelerated, that trend just violently reversed.
Completely. Since 1971, the system became a funnel. The bottom 90% share of wealth dropped to less than half, 49% by 2012, and it continues to fall.
And that wasn't an accident.
No, it was driven by specific policies pushed by those academic elites. Financial deregulation, tax code changes that favored capital gains over labor income, and the massive leverage granted to the financial industry. These are the mechanical tools that widen that GOP.
Making the richest share of income skyrocket by 150% after inflation and taxes, while the middle class just stagnated.
That's right. And one of the most visible consequences of this whole fake money system is how savers became losers.
This is a tragedy for anyone who followed the old rules of prudence and saving, isn't it?
It's a complete betrayal. After 2008, central banks engaged in what we now call financial repression, keeping interest rates artificially low, basically at zero. And this just punished anyone on a fixed income or anyone relying on interest payments.
The contrast is so stark. The source uses this example. If you had $1 million saved in 1970, you could earn 15% interest on it.
Right, netting you $150,000 a year. You could live on that very comfortably.
After 2008, that same $1 million might yield you, what, $20,000?
$20,000 if you're lucky. And that meager yield is often completely eaten away by the very inflation caused by the money printing that kept the rates low in the first place.
So the savers, the responsible citizens, they were the collateral damage.
They faced a choice. Watch their capital shrink in real terms or enter the risky, volatile stock market, the very market being artificially inflated by the Fed's fake money printing.
So the system forces ordinary people to become reluctant speculators just to maintain their standard of living.
That's exactly how it works.
To really understand the source of all this fake money and how it's just created out of thin air, we have to pull back the curtain on the invisible financial system. The source uses a really evocative term, the Mandrake mechanism.
The Mandrake mechanism, named after the comic book magician, is a perfect analogy for how commercial banks create money from nothing. It illustrates the money multiplier effect that's inherent in our banking system, which today operates almost entirely digitally.
Let's maybe move beyond the simple goldsmith analogy and explain how this works today in the digital age, especially since the Federal Reserve eliminated reserve requirements for banks in 2020.
That is a critical piece of context. Historically, fractional reserve meant banks had to hold a small fraction, say 10%, of deposits in reserve.
Right.
Today, since that reserve requirement is often zero, the mechanism is even more powerful. When a commercial bank makes a loan, say $100,000 for a car or a mortgage, they don't transfer that money from someone else's savings account.
They attribute it.
They simply credit the borrower's account with $100,000. That new money, a promise backed by debt, did not exist a moment before the loan was made.
So the loan creates the deposit. The debt is the money.
Exactly. And when that borrower spends the $100,000, that money gets deposited into another bank, which then uses that new deposit to make even more loans, multiplying the original credit expansion across the entire system.
And since 1971, when the dollar was no longer tied to gold, that leverage was just unleashed globally.
The entire system is built on this ever-expanding Mandrake magic show.
This brings us back to the most complex instruments created by the elites, derivatives, and specifically the mechanics of the 2008 collapse. We use the orange analogy juice as a derivative of the orange. How did the banks package and insure subprime loans using these derivatives?
So the banks took thousands of these really risky subprime loans given to borrowers with poor credit, and they bundled them together into tranches. Then they sold them off as mortgage-backed securities, or MBS.
These were the financial derivatives of the underlying housing assets. And they were marketed as safe because they were diversified.
Right. But the kicker was the insurance.
The credit default swap.
The CDS. The bank that issued the loans and sold the MBS would often buy a CDS from an insurance provider like AIG. The CDS was a contract that basically said, if these underlying mortgages default, you pay me.
So it was an insurance policy, another derivative, that allowed the banks to make astronomical profits selling risky debt while minimizing their apparent risk.
But when the housing market collapsed, AIG couldn't pay its promises, and the whole mechanism just seized up.
And this brings us to the most fundamental and dangerous concept underpinning that entire $1.2 quadrillion derivatives market, counterparty risk.
Counterparty risk is the risk that the person, bank, or institution on the other side of a contract doesn't keep their promise. They default.
And the entire global monetary system is built on layers and layers of this risk.
It is. If you deposit money in a bank, the bank promises to give it back, but only if its borrowers pay them back. If you own a bond, the issuer promises to pay interest, but only if they don't go bankrupt.
And the scale of the derivatives market makes this exponentially more dangerous. If $1.2 quadrillion is built on promises, what happens when a major counterparty, say a major global bank, fails to deliver on a complex interest rate swap?
That's systemic contagion. The failure of one massive counterparty creates a domino effect across dozens of other institutions, all of whom are relying on that promise to offset their risks. This is why Buffett called them weapons of mass destruction.
They don't just collapse one bank. They create a toxic chain reaction that can freeze global credit overnight.
Which is almost what happened in 2008.
And this is the stark philosophical contrast the source makes. It says that real gold and silver are God's money, precisely because they have no counterparty risk.
Exactly. When you hold physical gold, the asset itself is the value. It requires no promise from a bank or a government. It cannot default. It simply is. This is the fundamental security the sources urge listeners to acquire.
Now, to keep this whole Mandrake magic show running, the system requires inflation.
It absolutely does. The massive, ever-expanding debt that has been created since 1971 can only be paid off by making the currency cheaper over time.
So inflation is the natural outcome of fake money printing.
And it's a necessary tool for governments to deflate the real value of their debts. If deflation occurs, meaning prices fall and debt becomes more expensive in real terms, it often triggers depressions because the debt load becomes unbearable.
And that explains the Federal Reserve's aggressive intervention after 2008. They had to stop that deflationary spiral. That's where TARP and QE came in. I want us to clearly define these terms, not just call them high-sounding names.
That's a fair demand. So TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, was a direct injection of taxpayer money authorized by Congress. Its purpose was to buy toxic assets and inject capital directly into failing banks and companies like GM. It was a targeted bailout designed to stabilize the financial core.
And quantitative easing, or QE?
QE was the Federal Reserve's primary tool. This involved the Fed electronically printing money to buy long-term assets, primarily treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities, from the banks,
Driving down interest rates and injecting liquidity into the banking system to prevent a credit freeze.
Correct. So TARP was targeted aid. QE was massive market manipulation designed to keep the cost of money near zero.
But both were, at their core, forms of money printing.
Yes. Liquidity injection. They were required to reinflate Mandrake's tents and prevent the system from seizing up. The elites printed money to save themselves from their own structured failure, and the consequence, the resulting inflation and loss of purchasing power, was transferred directly to the average citizen and the fixed income saver.
So let's discuss how the elites maintain this system. It seems to rely heavily on a lack of transparency. The source uses an ancient Chinese proverb, "You cannot catch fish in clean water."
That proverb perfectly encapsulates the need for complexity and opacity. If the financial system were transparent, if the regulations were simple, the jargon was eliminated, it would be impossible to hide the transfer mechanisms of this cash heist.
The complexity of derivatives, offshore accounts, the ever-changing tax codes, it all ensures the water stays murky.
Which allows the elites to operate unseen.
And in this era, where the term fake news dominates public discourse, the necessity of financial education becomes, well, it's paramount. It's about verifying what is real and what is fake. A necessity that determines everything from your retirement stability to national stability.
Real financial education is about achieving a kind of X-ray vision. It's about seeing with your mind what your eyes cannot see.
Seeing the invisible money moving in and out of markets.
The counterparty promises hidden beneath the surface and the liabilities disguised as assets. Without that mental vision, you are perpetually vulnerable.
And that invisible movement is pointing toward the most dramatic possibility of all. The end of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency.
The analysis is unflinching on this point. The historical guarantee is a stern warning. If I hold all my wealth in fiat money, will I lose it all someday? Yes, you will lose it all. If history is a guide, not one fiat currency has ever survived.
And the dollar is just following the same trajectory.
The same trajectory of every government-issued currency before it.
We can actually see this, can't we? Using the chart that compares major world currencies against gold from 1900 to 2018.
The visual evidence is compelling. While you see short-term fluctuations, the purchasing power of the dollar, the euro, and the yen against a constant measure like gold shows a relentless, steep depreciation, especially after 1971.
So gold's price doesn't really go up.
The value of the fiat currency goes down. Gold just maintains its real value over time.
So if the dollar loses its reserve status, what's the elite's proposed next game? The sources mention something called special drawing rights, or SDRs.
The SDR is the potential pivot. It is an international reserve asset created by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It's not a currency itself, but it's a claim on a basket of currencies held by IMF members.
And that basket is currently the dollar, euro, yuan, yen, and pound.
Correct.
Why does the source view SDRs as just more fake money?
Because it's an attempt to create a global, centrally managed currency unit that can bypass a failure in a single national currency, like the dollar. It maintains the core fiat principle. Value is derived from institutional decree, not from a tangible asset.
So it's the elites attempting to run the same game, just under new terms.
Ensuring that monetary creation and control remain centralized, even as the dollar weakens. And while they prepare this, they themselves are quietly warehousing real gold.
This financial instability then directly translates into profound societal instability. The source makes a chilling connection between the widening wealth gap and the potential for revolution.
This is where economics meets history. The charts that show the widening GAP since 1979 aren't just figures on a page. They map social risk.
Revolutions, whether in Russia, Cuba, or more recently Venezuela, they're often preceded by extreme income disparity where the masses feel the system is rigged against them.
Exactly. When the middle class is decimated and the elites are visibly hoarding wealth and escaping consequences, societal stability erodes very quickly. The elites might disregard economic equality, but they can't disregard the political consequences of unrest.
But the Chinese symbol for crisis reminds us that it contains two characters: danger plus opportunity.
Absolutely. The crash is dangerous for those who are unprepared and financially illiterate, but it represents enormous opportunities. Asset prices fall, debts are often restructured. Those holding real assets and cash flow can acquire wealth rapidly. The entire point of real financial education is to position yourself on the side of opportunity when the danger arrives.
So, given this really bleak assessment of the fake system, how do we prepare for a future where we have to soar with eagles in a world run by chickens? It starts, surprisingly, with a spiritual lesson.
The source material recounts attending a seminar with a Hindu guru, and it emphasizes that wealth isn't just about accumulation. When someone asked him why he wore so much gold, the guru explained that gold and silver are the tears of God. Gold attracts wealth.
So the lesson there is that gold is not just an investment. It's a mindset about attracting real wealth.
It's about shifting your focus from the quantity of money to the quality and the method of its acquisition. Wealth isn't the number in your bank account. It's the financial intelligence and the cash flow you control, independent of the government's currency decisions.
Right.
The core philosophy is about separating yourself from the corruption of the centralized financial system and shifting your energy from working for fake money W-2 labor to acquiring real assets that work for you. And the sources offer 3 concrete strategies.
Okay, strategy number 1, own real gold and silver gods' money.
And this is presented not as an investment that's seeking high returns, but as insurance. It is a hedge against the stupidity of the elites and the inevitable failure of fiat currency.
It's a store of value that is outside the banking system and eliminates that counterparty risk we talked about.
Precisely.
And the practicality here is important. It's often perceived as something only for the super rich, but the source emphasizes that it is accessible.
It's entirely accessible. You can buy fractional pieces or silver coins. A pre-1965 silver dollar, often called junk silver, can be purchased for around $20. The point isn't to become a gold magnate overnight. The point is to own some physical metal held in your own safe or a private vault, eliminating the trust requirement in the banking system.
Okay, strategy number 2, avoid fake paper gold. This is a crucial warning for our audience, who might think they're securing their wealth through seemingly convenient methods.
This is the critical distinction between owning the asset and owning a promise on the asset. The source warns very strongly against popular exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, like GLD for gold and SLV for silver.
Because they're paper assets traded on stock exchanges, and they reintroduce counterparty risk.
They do. They are part of Mandrake's magic show, the fractional reserve system.
So the fear is that these ETFs might be selling hundreds of ounces of paper gold or silver contracts for every single ounce of real physical metal they actually hold in a vault somewhere.
Exactly. And in a panic or a systemic crash, when everyone rushes to convert their paper promise into the physical asset, the vast majority of holders will find themselves holding worthless paper because the counterparty simply cannot deliver.
By keeping the physical metal outside of the financial system, you are trusting the element itself, not the promise of a leveraged institution.
That is the core takeaway. Physical holding is the only true insurance against systemic default. If the bank is closed, the market is shut down, or the electricity is out, that physical asset retains its value and utility.
And the third, and arguably most important strategy, it circles right back to where we started: financial education.
The real problem is the lack of financial education in public life. The system is designed to keep the masses financially illiterate, trapping them in the cycle of W-2 labor and bad consumer debt. It leaves them vulnerable to the financial debt instruments, like massive student loans, that underpin this entire fake system.
So the ultimate solution is to gain real financial education to become rich with or without money. And this involves understanding how to use the system against itself.
You have to learn to use debt, which is fake money strategically, to acquire equity and assets that generate cash flow. This is the difference between good debt, which buys assets that generate more than they cost, like a rental property.
And bad debt, which buys liabilities that rapidly depreciate, like consumer goods or new cars.
Right. The financial crash will be a massive transfer of wealth from the financially uneducated to those who have the wisdom to see the invisible money and acquire real income-producing assets.
This deep dive into the philosophy of the three fakes has pulled no punches. We've traced the systemic risk all the way back to the 1971 abandonment of the gold standard, which unleashed fake money and created fake assets.
Including the 401k and government pensions, which are now liabilities crushing the middle-class dream of retirement.
The mechanical risk is immense, embodied in that $1.2 quadrillion derivatives market perpetuated by Mandrate's fractional reserve magic.
And this system requires constant inflation to survive, which inevitably sacrifices the saver and accelerates income inequality to dangerous levels. History guarantees that all fiat currencies eventually fail.
So the actionable path forward isn't complexity, but simplicity. Separate yourself from this volatile system through radical financial education and the acquisition of real, tangible assets, physical gold and silver, as insurance against the coming instability.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought, one that requires some genuine self-introspection. Many people reflexively claim they are not interested in money, yet they dedicate their entire lives, 40 to 50 hours a week, working for it. If money is truly an invisible construct and the entire financial future is built on fake promises and counterparty risk, are you willing to do the intellectual work to face the financial truths that most people refuse to see, or will you remain complicit in working for a system designed to keep you holding the bag?
Think about that carefully. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.